Could you start off by telling us your name, degree, and the year you're in?
My name is Wherrett. I'm doing a Bachelor of Law in Economics and I'm in my third year.
And why are you running for USU board?
So I've been really involved over the past 2 years, and over that time, I'm a big Hamilton fan. The song "The Rumor It Happens." Because I've been tangentially involved in the USU through reviews, through CNS, the decisions that the USU board have made have affected me. So much so that I eventually decided that I just had to be in the room where it happened. And so I decided to run for USU.
What's a decision you'd say has affected you?
Anything to do with clubs and societies and the way clubs and societies work. I'm on a number of execs. For instance, the alcohol policy affected, the different clubs and societies that I'm a part of and the events that we were planning for that. Yeah,
we might get onto the alcohol policy in a bit.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
In terms of political stuff, are you in a faction?
Yep, I'm a member of Student Unity on campus.
And you're campus convener of Student Unity, is that
No,
right?
no, I'm not. That's Claudia.
That's Claudia, okay.
Yes.
In terms of Student Unity is a Labour Party, a faction of the Labour Party on campus. Does it politically bind? Does it bind its board directors?
No. So Student Unity will support a board candidate with the expectation and with the faith that, they're going to, there's never been a case in which our previous board directors have sort of come back to Unity and said, what am I doing on this? There's a great deal of autonomy with the board directors that are elected.
And how do you describe Student Unity's political views?
Principled, pragmatic, and progressive are the other sort of bylines. But yeah, it's true. It's unashamedly progressive on every single issue, but doing it in a way that's pragmatic and doing it in a way which we really discuss all the different options.
Which of the three do you reckon is the most defining?
Progressive. Yeah.
When it comes to USU board, how will that translate into practice? So let's say you're faced with a decision like last year where you might have to vote to support a strike or to strike in solidarity with the NTEU. Would you as board director support that?
Well, the thing about the solidarity with strikes things is that the USU board had information about financial costs and so on that we don't have access to. So it's difficult to say how I would vote on that issue when I don't have access to the same documents that a board director would.
But if principally being progressive is the most important of those three things, shouldn't it be
with being pragmatic about things? And it's the idea that you always have to consider being pragmatic about things when making decisions. Generally, I would lean towards supporting the strike, but generally I support strike action. I'm a trade unionist. I'm a member of my union. I think it's a good idea, but I don't have access to all the information that the board directors would have.
So, in terms of the USU's broader political role, do you think then that the USU can play a role in activism, in direct action? Can it get involved in things like protest organisations, or is it more of a service providing union?
So I would lean more towards service providing union solely for a few reasons. First of all is that we have the SRC and Supra who do take that role, and the USU is mostly a service provider. I do think that the USU should participate in activism where it represents the overwhelming majority of students' views. If there is an overwhelming outcry by students that we need to do this, then I think it's non-controversial. By nature, it's non-controversial for the USU to be like, we'll stand up for this. Particularly, things like marriage equality, for instance. The USU should, when it was an issue, there's nothing wrong with the USU proudly and firmly saying we support marriage equality because most of our students believe it.
Would you say opposing fee deregulation is an issue that most students believe in?
Yes, but the issue is that when you get into issues that are very much replicated on the political divide, the union has to be there for everybody. And in terms of activism, that is the role of the SRC, but the USU should be first and foremost a service provider, and when there is an overwhelming majority of people who support a particular viewpoint, the USU should stand in favour of it. Always keep in mind that the USU is there for everybody, and you know, the second that you start engaging in activism in which people feel like they can't engage in the USU, then that's when you lose access members and you lose what the core of the USU does.
Cool. So board directors have a number of like fiduciary duties to the board. You said that you had certain principles derived from like student unity's values, including progressivism. So presumably you have ideas about what's in students' benefits and what's not. Are there situations in which you would breach your duties to the board if you thought that it would be in students' benefits?
I mean, 99% of upholding student benefits is upholding your fiduciary duties, because when you're upholding your fiduciary duties, the union is strong, and when the union is strong, it's in the students' interests. We have fiduciary duties to make sure that we have a strong, financially sound union that is there to provide for students. And so I would be very, very skeptical of any situation in which people argued that it was required to breach those fiduciary duties. But of course, you know, if there is a situation in which it's overwhelmingly clear, then, you know, as a board director, you do have to do what students.
So does that mean the financial sustainability of the board is the most important thing that you'll be acting on?
The strength of the USU is the most important thing, and the strength of the USU comes from a few things. It comes from financial sustainability. It comes from knowledge of the USU, making sure every student sort of understands the USU, and making sure that the USU is continuing to provide all of the different programs that it does. And all of those things are mostly upheld by upholding fiduciary duties.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask about, you know, what would be if you were forced to make a decision, for example, back to striking or anything, where you said you would have to consider information not available to everyone else. I guess then the question is, well, what would be your decision-making process? Because that is something you could disclose to people rather than, so it's like, well, are we not going to make a profit for the month, or are we not going to break even this month? Because being a not-for-profit, I mean, how do you think that your decision-making process would work in that situation? What would be your aim in terms of a more specific thing than just saying, I'll uphold the fiduciary duties and be a, you know, prudent person?
In terms of making a decision, I think the key thing is consultation, especially consultation with the USU staff, because we have to remember that yes, the USU is accountable to students, but also it employs staff, and those are the ones who would be affected by any sort of strike action. Solidarity strike action is what I mean. And I feel like proper consultation with the different staff members would be one of the first things that I would want to do. As well as that, you know, basic things such as what benefit it would have to the strike, to the NTU strike, what benefit it would have to students, just standard pragmatic considerations. I would point out that with the EBA negotiating period being 3 years, and if elected I would serve for 2 years, it is very unlikely that I would have to deal with anything with this issue specifically. But in terms of any sort of difficult question for a USU board director, consultation is the main way that I would make a decision.
So given that the USU employs a lot of staff, and a lot of staff in senior positions have been in the organisation for a long time and have pretty clear ideas about how it should be run, how are you going to ensure that through that consultative process, you as a student director with a policy platform that you want to implement don't have your voice overcrowded by staff whose views you just said are paramount?
Sorry, what do you mean? Can you clarify the question?
So I mean, if you've got a vision for actually running the board, right?
Yeah.
But consulting with staff is the touchstone through how you'll make decisions.
It's one of the touchstones. It's one of the different ways in which decisions will be made. If elected as board director, you know, consultation with all the relevant interest groups and people involved, people who would be affected by the decision is just something that I'm very keen about. It is a bit of a buzzword to say consultation, but it is true that as board directors, you are representatives, and it is ignorant to think that you can speak on behalf of the student board and the student staff without listening to them and talking to them.
So by nature a lot of the board's decisions, consultation is difficult, if not impossible. They concern like private financial arrangements of the board. A lot of what the board has to deliberate on happens in camera in meetings.
Yes.
How are you going to consult on issues when you can't actually disclose the subject?
Well, I will point out that a large part of my policy statement, I do have things about accountability, because I do think that there needs to be more transparency. I think there needs to be, I obviously have no idea what's said in camera, but I would guess that a lot of what's said in camera, it would actually benefit the student population more if it was not in camera and if it was more publicly disclosed. So I do really believe in transparency and accountability of the board, and that's something that I would push for, and I know a lot of board directors have pushed for in the past. But in terms of your question, which is, how can I do it without this? I will point out that in board meetings, there are, of course, people present such as the SADs, who have a lot of institutional knowledge, and I would consult with them. I would consult with the CEO. And obviously these people are biased. Obviously these people always lean towards one side, but making sure I hear their arguments is one of the most important things.
In terms of ending in camera, or at least increasing transparency, would you support then reducing the amount that's discussed in camera?
Yes.
So given before you said the financial sustainability of the organisation was important, like one of the key things that made the union strong, what if discussing matters confidentially to the extent that they are discussed currently is essential to keeping
my understanding
the organisation strong?
My understanding of in camera is that financial sustainability is one of the reasons things go in camera. And I think that, obviously it's impossible to really properly analyze the in-camera. It's a chicken and egg problem. It's impossible to really analyze how we can reduce in-camera discussions when we don't actually know what the discussions are. But if there are in-camera discussions that would only sort of like the tiniest bit of reducing financial sustainability and the strength of the board, then I think the benefit of access, not that access, like access, would benefit students more than any disbenefit from, disclosing information.
In terms of the board's achievements and its activities in recent times, can you name an initiative or a policy in recent years that you particularly value?
So I was very involved in reviews. So I've been in 2 reviews. I was on the executive review last year, and I think just in the past year, the movement of international review from policy idea to a reality, I look forward to seeing the show in a few weeks' time, is something that I'm really, really excited by. And it's, everything good that the union can be.
On the flip side, what's a policy you might criticise?
The alcohol policy. The alcohol policy was done, I don't think, with enough consultation. I think there were events planned by clubs and societies. Sorry, are you going to have a question on this?
We can get onto this
We
now.
can get on this now, yeah. So there are events that would have been planned by clubs and societies that would have had to be modified. Treasurers plan budgets for events and so on, and when you change the policy without consultation or without warning, it affects clubs and societies management, and that's the reason why so many different clubs and societies spoke out against this particular policy change.
So in terms of the policy itself, do you think it's a good policy?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Because the issue is when you say that we should only be funding things on campus, you need to have the support in place for people to have events on campus. A club and society can't book out Hermans. You cannot have a policy that redirects alcohol-based events to on-campus venues and then limit the access of those on-campus venues. It doesn't go hand in hand.
Given that Manning doesn't have bookings like most nights of the week, it seems that there's supply at least for clubs to use.
But see the issue with Manning is, so in my CNS experience, you have 2 options. You can either go through a booking process, which is long and exhaustive. I tried to get something organised, didn't work out well. Or you can just sort of roll the dice and hope that Manning is mostly empty that night. And that's something that a lot of clubs and societies don't want to do. Yes, it is empty most nights, but imagine the disaster of you hosting this wonderful event, everyone getting there and seeing it's booked out. So I think the club and society venue options aren't open enough to redirect funding in a way so much that it's only for on-campus venues.
So your policy is then to make alcohol cheaper off campus. Could you explain how you'll do that?
So what do you mean? Oh, we would just reverse the policy.
The board just so you would just undo the policy.
Yeah,
entirely.
I just disagree with the policy.
Great. So in that case, why not? So you said that the problem with the policy as it currently stands is a lack of supply of venues on campus. Why not make those venues better rather than reverse the policy?
Well, that's yes. I'm sure that would be an option, but there are obviously reasons within Herman's and within Manning and within the different venues that have led them to be the policy that they are. But generally, if I was to rank the different options, yes, more options at Manning and Herman's would be better than what we've got now.
Right.
That's something that, if I would be unsuccessful in convincing my fellow board directors, if elected, of a reversal of this policy, then I would move towards trying to convince them and trying to implement ways in which we could open up these venues more.
But if you are successful, then don't you go back to a situation where clubs and societies are drinking large quantities of alcohol in spaces unsupervised by the USU, and that serious safety concerns can be raised, which really the USU has a duty of care to prevent?
Yeah, I don't think that this is the policy means of fixing it. I know that, I just don't think lots of people drinking alcohol at Herman's or Manning is substantially better in any way than lots of people drinking alcohol at the Royal or the Rhodes. I just really don't see any distinguishable difference between those things.
Well, at least you as the USU board have control over the training that staff get in terms of like what kind of sexual assault response practices are in place on campus. Campus securities around, aren't those important considerations above and beyond other venues? I think it's
quite a reach to say that the way in which we assist those issues, assist those issues is via a funding change to clubs and societies to redirect them, because the other issue with this is, as I said, because there aren't substantial enough availabilities on campus. So what you're doing is you're probably not actually, I don't have any evidence on this, but you're probably not actually redirecting club and society events from outside venues to inside venues. You're probably just clubs and societies will just continue having them outside venues, but with students just paying more. Which doesn't solve any issues and actually takes away from the service provider nature of the USU to organise that service that is making sure we have clubs and societies with consistent good events.
But hold on, you can't have it both ways. You said initially that this policy was bad because there hadn't been consultation and treasurers had locked in events for the rest of the semester that were now up in the air. But now you're saying that clubs and societies are going on events and are still drinking off campus. What's the
not the venue is in the air. The financial situation is in the air. For a treasurer, the financial situation of the club and society over the year has changed. As I said, it probably just mean that they'll have to rebudget the event or maybe have a fundraiser or something to compensate for the specific policy, for the specific event that may have now lost money.
Yeah, I think we're doubling back then in terms of your responsibility as a board director. If elected, you find out that confidentially, potentially there's a directive from the university to say, this is your policy, this is crucial to our agreement, we'll cut the agreement, we won't renew it as much if you don't have this policy. Like, how far is your conviction then, I guess, to how vital do you think changing this policy is in terms of your potential actions if you were to find that this was something that required more action from you in terms of potentially breaching your making information available or breaching your role as a board director?
Well, as I said before, we need a strong union, and anything that would threaten the agreement between the university and the USU would take it to the next level and would be something that I would definitely consider in making my decision on how I'd vote as a board director. As I said, whenever if elected onto the board, I would seek all of the information possible to make a decision and also consult with my fellow board directors to come to that decision. And obviously new information would potentially mean that things change. But yeah.
Cool. Moving on to the campaign itself, I guess. Out of this year's field of candidates, who would you say your top three picks are?
I absolutely love Beck. I really love her policy statement. Stuff around surge is really good. Stuff around sexual assault is really good. I really like Mike Mao, Magic Mike Mao. I think his guidelines for clubs and societies code of conduct is an incredible policy. I also like Zimeng Yi. I think she's got some really good ideas for the board in her policy statement. That's purely based on the policy statement. I want to have more conversations with them about their vision, about their ideas. And, yeah.
Are you hoping to negotiate preference deals with those three candidates?
Yeah, I'm hoping to negotiate. I'm willing to talk to all candidates about preference deals and preferences that reflect my values and who I want to see on the board. But also preference deals are also based on things such as what we see in the first week of campaigning and more talking to other candidates. So yes, that is all still up in the air for the next week or so.
And then on the flip side, who could you not work with out of this year's field of candidates?
I wouldn't say not work with, but I would say that there is a ideological divide between me and Lachlan Finch. I think that's something that's obvious. I just don't think that his party reflects the ideals of unionism and student unionism, and that, I just think there's a difference there that's very difficult to reconcile.
At the same time, though, when we spoke to Lachlan, a lot of the basic things he was saying about his approach to the board are the same as what you're saying. He's saying that a strong union is important, that financial sustainability goes hand in hand with student welfare, and that he'd act consultatively as a board director. So is there really any difference between the two of you, apart from labelling?
Well, it's just the difficult thing of, when you're sort of a member of the Liberal Party, as he is, I don't hold that against him in terms of any decisions that he'd make on the board. But ideologically, there is a barrier in terms of being a Liberal Party member and being on the board at the same time, especially considering some of the Liberal Party's actions over the last 10 years when it comes to student unionism. There are just conflicts there that are just almost impossible to reconcile.
Okay. In the upcoming board presidential elections, then, if you were to get elected, who would you support?
I think the answer is very similar, and also made easy by the fact that Liliana is very competent. Liliana is very competent. She's shown herself well on the board. I think she'd be a great presidential candidate. Obviously, based on what Oni has said, the only two people considering it are Liliana and Jacob, and for the same reasons as I said with Lachlan, there would just be a very difficult thing to wrangle with Jacob. But also, I'm happy to say that if elected to the board, I would make sure that I listened to all the potential candidates' cases, listened to them well, asked them questions, and spoke to them about where they want to see the board going, because they do have to prepare a substantial document, and obviously I haven't seen that document then.
Other things surrounding the election, do you support the board's affirmative action policy for non-cisgender men?
Yes.
And would you support a similar policy for international students?
No, because the reason for international students is the fact that obviously we've seen in the past 2 years that international students are making their voice heard on the board, and this is a wonderful thing. And I just don't think that we can equate something like AA for women with AA for international students in the same way. I just don't think that it is an identity, but it is not an identity in the same way as being sort of a woman. But what I mean by that is that in terms of other policies with regards to the SRC and the USU, it's not something that's really recognised as sort of a group that needs affirmative action to get onto the board. The reason why the USU implemented AA for women is because there was a period of male candidate. There was a year in which, the vast majority of the candidates were male. If you look back at the history, it was very worrying when AA for women was implemented. And if you look at the past 2 years of USU elections, I don't think there's a substantial case enough for AA for international students.
And if that were to change?
If that were to change, then yeah.
Okay. One of your policies, I suppose, as well, was to support a concession opal card for international students. So clearly international students' issues are ones that are in some way important to you. Doesn't that mean that more international student, or at least guaranteed international student representation on the board is a good thing?
It is a good thing to have international students on the board, but we should only implement something like AA when there is a clear problem with a lack of representation.
In terms of that policy about fighting for a concession card for international students, you mentioned before that the USU doesn't have the same activist role to play as the SRC. So how are you actually going to fight for that opal card?
Well, I think this is just an issue, like I was saying before. I think if you talk to students, there is an overwhelming response for international student concessions. There is an overwhelming response by all of the students. It's not a divisive issue at all. Most students would agree that, domestic students get opal cards, international students should get concession opal cards in the exact same way. And I think the USU, with a sort of large percentage of international students as members or affiliate members by being students, should be proud to state that through activism, whether it be on their page, whether it be a statement, whether it be any sort of activism.
So hold on, the campaign's going to be limited to statements on...
No, that's not campaign limiting to it. That's just me saying some options for how the USU should get their name out
there. Would
there
be an option to hold a rally?
I would rather the rally... See, that's exactly what I was saying about the SRC. Rallies and protests and actions are primarily more the role of the SRC. And the USU could support a rally, but people, this space that we're in, the SRC, is an activist space. There is painting, rooms, and there are posters everywhere. And that's really what the SRC is designed to do. And once the USU starts taking away the roles of the SRC, then you get into messy SAF things.
Well, on the flip side, the USU always takes a bigger slice of the SAF pie than the SRC. Yeah. So clearly, with that huge war chest, it could add a very strong voice to student activism.
Well, I would
use those resources.
I would dismiss the idea of having a huge war chest, because while the USU does take a larger portion of the SAF pile, it does also provide a larger array and a huge array of programs and services and places on campus that need to be accessed and need to be used by students. And, it would be difficult to sort of say which area should we take away. There isn't a huge pile of money that the USU is sitting on. It's funding student services and different student programs that students love.
Yeah, I guess we can continue on that policy statement then, the international students focused ones. So you have then the next one is preferencing international students and those living away from home for USU jobs. So I guess we'll just start by if you can explain what that policy means, how you think you would implement it in a bit more detail than the one line.
Well, I really quite like, sorry, it's a 200 word limit on the policy statement, but I really, I've quite older friends who were at the union 5 years ago, and so there was more of a culture of USU jobs for university students, and it was kind of a thing that happened. It was, you went to uni, but you also went to work for the USU, you worked on the access desk. And I think in terms of ways in which we could support students, preferencing students for USU jobs, firstly, that's the first thing we can do. And the second thing we can do is we can preference those living at home, living out of home, because then that means that they have a job at uni, they don't need to double their travel time by going to a different travel location, and it means that they can have an income source to support their study that's directly at uni. The way that I would support this is just loosely, not through any sort of quota by anything, but by just saying that, having a policy that in determining who gets hired for the USU, these factors must be considered. Do they live away from home? Are they an international student? Do they need a job based on their income? Things like that, because the USU, yes, it should get the best staff possible, but it also should be there to support students. This would be a great way to do that.
I guess. Okay. So we'll go back to the start when you said talking about in the past hiring policies would potentially favour students more. Would you, I guess, mandate that students have to be considered first for certain roles?
I would say that there should be a policy in which students are preferenced for staff, and especially where you had a case where there was, a student and a staff member of completely equal merit. The student should obviously be favoured in that because they are at the university, and the USU should be there to support them.
Doesn't this get very messy very quickly? So for instance, would students living at college or on say scholarships at college count as living away from home?
So in the factors of consideration, I said that those living away from home, but also things like income and whether the USU should support them, obviously. But it also shouldn't be discounted that colleges, you have to also you'd have to very strictly define the lines, because you want people in, for instance, the university provided accommodation. I think they would be ripe for USU jobs. I think they'd be great for them, both in terms of their income and where they are, but not so much college students who might already have an easy source of income for themselves.
So you said you'd introduce other criteria into these preferences. So isn't this very quickly just going to be a pile-up of criteria so that the jobs go to people who ideologically you would expect or hope the jobs go to? I mean, if you're introducing, it started off as a pretty basic policy about giving jobs to international students and people who live away from home. If we're introducing income, if we're introducing like region of Sydney, if we're going to increase the criteria, isn't this just a way to ensure that the jobs go to people who ideologically you expect them to go to?
No. So the criteria means that it has to be a factor within the hiring process. There are already hiring factors. The most obvious factor is whether they're qualified for the job or not. And that should always be the most overwhelming factor. But it's simply the idea that people who need USU jobs should be given a better outlook by a USU job interviewer. And obviously, if this policy were to gain support by the other board directors, then we would workshop it and we would find a model that would both enhance simplicity and also enhance the goal, which is USU jobs for USU students, and those USU jobs for students should go to people who really need them.
Would you add to those factors for consideration, say that the candidate is a woman or is not a cisgender man?
Again, similar to what you said about the international students, similar to the question about international students, I would want to look at the USU staff and determine if there is a problem, if there is a definitive problem with the hiring of women, for instance. I would analyse the gender pay gap among the USU staff. I would analyse the percentage and what parts of the USU they're part of, and I would determine whether there's a problem or not.
Would you, for instance, extend this policy to external providers operating within USU spaces as well? So, for example, at O Week, when brands bring staff and when there's a massive influx of workers and events like that, would you mandate similar policies for those kind of workers as well?
I'm not sure of how. So you're talking about, so say like there's an Optus stand and Optus hires the people to work on the Optus stand during O Week. I'm not sure what the contracts are and how specific they are. That would be something that would really need to be looked into more detail. But in principle, I support more USU job opportunities and affiliate job opportunities for University of Sydney students. Sure.
Cool. Onto a couple of your other policies then. You've got a bevy of policies at the start of the policy platform about like making food on campus better, making live music on campus better. I mean, that's very vague to say making something better. I mean, it's very easy for you to claim that you've improved that policy, that you've delivered on that policy if one person says that, oh, this food outlet is better. What do you actually mean?
Well, the issue with the policy statement is that you do have to put specific policies in it, but it's also asking you it doesn't specifically ask you, but the nature of it sort of demands that you have a vision for the board and an outlook of a board and what you would fight for on the board. The reason that I put better food on campus and better music on campus is because if elected on the board, I would preference those things, and I would work on these things, and I would be part of the working parties and the committees, hopefully, that sort of were part of the process of improving those things. And because they are important to most students and they are important to pretty much every Access members. It is basic to say that we should have better food on campus and better venues on campus, but that's a large part of the reason why people get an Access card, and we shouldn't discount that for being a very standard policy.
But having a policy that just uses the word better and leaving it up to students to kind of imagine what that might mean is very electorally convenient, isn't it? I mean, you can now do walk and talks where you just say, we're going to make food on campus better, and hopefully get votes that way. What do you actually see as being better food on campus?
Well, better food means, for instance, there's a policy about food trucks. I think the food trucks that we've seen so far have been a fantastic initiative. In terms of talking to the students, what they want is they want more options. This is from previous board campaigns. They want more options, and they want more value for money. So better food means more things like cheap combo deals to get a lunch for only $5 or $6 and a good lunch. It means different ideas around how we can really vary up the food options and also vary it up consistently, so people have new, different things, so they're not going to the same place every single week.
You've got another policy then there about improving non-USU outlets. What do you mean by that, given the USU doesn't have control over non-USU outlets?
So the purpose of that policy is if in any case the contract with Subway or the contract with Exquisito were to ever come up, I would have consultation and determine if the students like these outlets, or whether there is scope for renewal of these outlets, or whether people don't like them. That's pretty much the basis of it. I think those are the only two non-USU outlets. Is there another? In USU buildings, I mean.
There's new sushi place.
Oh yeah.
Subway, bottom floor of Manning.
Yeah.
In terms of another couple of policies in that case, so on access equity, again, you said you'd expand the access equity scheme. Can you give us an idea of what that would look like? Like numbers, how many
So the main way I would improve it is advertising and accessibility of the scheme. There is, I realise that I talk to a biased view of students. Being a law student means that you do have people people of higher income, but I've only so far spoken to one person who has told me that they've used the access equity scheme just in conversation, and that person previously campaigned for a board candidate who ran on this policy. So that demonstrates to me that there is a lack of knowledge about this option for low SES students. And I don't know if it's anything just as simple as just making sure that every student who is signed up with the university on an E12 make sure that they get an email about the access equity scheme.
Would you support expanding the numbers of access equity cards that are given out?
Yep.
Okay. Your other policy on access is a monthly pay scheme. How do you envision that working?
Very simple. You can sign up to Access for $6 a month, for instance.
So, given that the Constitution of the USU defines a member of the union as somebody who has paid their fees, aren't you creating constitutional nightmares if one person pays for the full year and then another person is paying their fees, effectively has not paid their fees in full because they're paying on a staggered basis?
So this is the policy that would have to be workshopped and looked at, but it's just a policy that I think we should wrestle with any issues. I mean, the Constitution is up for change anyway. I think there's still some constitutional amendments that they want to get through. Chuck this one in, throw it in there, And because I think that this would, because what we want to do is we want to increase the amount of access membership students have, so the students' money. Because if you increase the amount of access memberships, you can do two things. You can either reduce the cost of access or provide more services. So this is me thinking, well, what are the ways that we could improve the amount of access memberships we have? Month-to-month access sounds like a great idea for that. And whatever issues there are, I would look forward to, if elected on board, working through those issues and trying to get it done.
Like, logistically, don't you think it's just more likely a whole lot of students will sign up for the first month of the year so they can join some clubs during O Week, and then access membership will sharply drop off?
Well, no, because I think that the policy should state that once your access membership drops off, then you are no longer a member of those clubs and societies. I think that's completely fair. That does sound logistically hard, but it is something that the benefit gained from more access members would outweigh any disbenefit in terms of bureaucracy.
I think then what happens if you're a club and you get to, say, October and you have a zero membership list because no one has paid their fees for that month, and you can't get re-registered, and your club dies because...
Well, part of that is making sure you run a good club. If you run a good club, then people will make sure that they stay members, and people will make sure that they stay access members for that. I think that's, if you have a good club and society, then that would be a way in which you could make sure that people are engaging with it, because you're like, hey, do you think we're doing a good job? Make sure to keep paying your access. And keep in mind that this wouldn't automatically be everyone switching to a $5 a month system. It would have options. There are many students who would prefer the flat payment, and of course the flat yearly payment would definitely, based on incentives and so on, have a discount for that.
So doesn't that mean that in the long run you'd actually be making low SES students worse off?
How so?
Given that they would be paying more
No,
over the entire period.
No, because this is designed to attract people who weren't access members in the first place. It's not attracting people who are already access members and who find it difficult to pay the payment at the year. It's attracting the people who I've spoken to have said, no, I just don't feel like I can pay $65 for access. So this would be a way to attract people who aren't access members.
A lot of this is a kind of policy that's been promised a lot. I think in the 4 years, however long I've been here now, it's come up every year. Nothing's been done to reduce the cost of access or to change the payment scheme. Can you guarantee that your term on board, if elected, will be the one where it happens?
It would be a priority for while I'm on board to fight for this. And I also look hopeful that, my favorite other candidate in the race, Beck, if she gets elected, which I think would be a great thing, and I really would like that to happen, she's also got that in her statement. So it would be something that we'd work on together, perhaps, and it would be something...
Work on with Lachlan Finch on this, given he has it in his statement too.
So what does he have in his statement? Because what I saw was the gold, silver and bronze thing.
Alongside making access cheaper.
Making access cheaper, that's the kind of thing that I think is vague, and the reason why things like this don't happen. Making access month to month it's a smart goal, and I think it's something that we can sort of set up a plan to achieve. But if Lachlan was on board with the month to month access, get him involved and let's work out a policy to get this done.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's about all we had. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And best of luck for the rest of the campaign.
Thank you so much. I'll see you.